We are in London with Abdullah Sayed, who is coming from Eritrea, and we talk about the situation of this country. You are not optimistic about the next future. You are worried that something very bad could happen, maybe a war.
Yes, I'm very worried because Eritrea is currently not run by a government that respects the people and the country and the interests of the people and the country. What we have is a mafia regime that is almost stealing the resources of the country, enslaving the youth, and dragging the country into total chaos. Because of that, also we have now thousands of Eritrean young people are fleeing, leaving the country and coming as far as Europe and other parts of the world, which indicates that there is a serious problem. The army itself is not a united institution as we know it. It's a very fragile and very personalized type of army groups.
So you say there are warlords?
Some of these generals could turn into mafia gangs or warlords and try. Already they do have their own control, their own prisons, their own businesses, and that means it's an indicator that they can turn into warlords in their own right.
That means that prisons don't belong to the state but to some generals.
Absolutely. There are no official prisons that you can call prison where people can be detained or even imprisoned for any legal offenses. People can be snatched from the streets, from their own homes, from anywhere, including from bordering countries like Sudan, and then no one would find out where they are held, and why. So the generals almost like run their own prisons and they imprison anyone they wish at will without any recourse to any judicial process. This is what we have in Eritrea, no prisons. But there are thousands of prisoners or detainees who have no kind of legal rights, and their families
cannot forced to work.
Their families cannot visit them. No one knows whether they are forced to work or whether they are being tortured and killed as well. But they're being kept in away from everyone for the last 10, 15, 20, some even more years in prison. So this is the situation we have. And this is not a small number of people that we are talking about. It's estimated at around 15,000 Eritrean political detainees.
Eritrea got independence from Ethiopia after a long war. Now, what is the role of Ethiopia in this crisis?
There is no specific role of Ethiopia, but the regime does use Ethiopia as a pretext, or the threat from Ethiopia as a pretext to continue the way it's running the country. But there could be some probably positive role for Ethiopia if the government tries to work with the rest of the IGAD nations to help the Eritrean people to overcome this problem, and in case if the regime collapses at any minute, which is imminent, then to also help with securing the country from any dangers and any anarchy and the threat the warlords can pose to the nation as well as to the neighboring countries. But right now, really, the whole problem, the main source of the problem, is the regime that is ransacking the country, not anyone else, but the regime. So if there is any external factors to the problems we have, it is caused by the same regime that we have in Eritrea. So it's our own problem, and it has to be solved by ourselves, hopefully.
What about the international community? Why is it so difficult to take the regime to ICC?
Well, ICC is a legal process, so it might happen at some point in future, but right now they probably don't see the interests of Eritrea as a high priority because we have the Syrian problems and other parts of the world. However, the ICC issue, I think it's going to be investigated, and probably it might happen this year or next year. In the meantime, I think the international community needs to be very much interested in what's going on in Eritrea right now, because many of those Eritreans who are fleeing from the regime are also arriving in Europe, in Italy, and these countries cannot really ignore this situation unless they help the Eritrean people address the problem, the root cause of the problem, then you will have people coming over to Europe to seek asylum and sanctuary. So this is very much an international problem. It's not just an Eritrean problem, and I think everyone has to cooperate with the Eritrean people to resolve it.
But Europe is still supporting the Eritrean regime.
Unfortunately, Europeans really sometimes they do have a passive attitude towards Eritrea. They also think sometimes by supporting or giving development aid to the regime, they can probably reduce some of the issues that they think that is pushing the refugees out of their country, but that's not true. And we've been campaigning probably for the last 7-8 years within the European Union to make this issue very clear, and we at some point felt probably this has now changed, but we are still seeing now people going back to the same attitude of passivity and going to give development aid, which is really not a development aid, but empowerment of the regime to continue with the way they're treating the Eritrean people and the Eritrean youth who are fleeing and coming to Europe.
If the doors of Europe were completely open to Eritrean refugees, could the regime collapse quicker?
Possible, yes. Not necessarily immediately and as a direct cause of this closure, but the regime has two options: either to push Eritrean young people outside the country or be in the army for indefinite periods of time. That is because if the young people are left in the towns and in the urban centers, then they can come out in demonstrations and it can also challenge the regime. So to avoid that, the only way of controlling the young people is to put them in either army camps or push them outside the country. So closure of refugee doors may not be the direct solution, but definitely helping the Eritrean people, helping the international community understand what's going on, and also put pressure through media, through ICC, others, might help more.
If all young people leave the country, who is going to military service?
Well, the government or the regime has a culture of even drawing young people underage, that's children, to the army. So they don't really care as long as they are safe in their power. Then they don't mind keeping as little or as a small number of young people as possible to just maintain themselves, while letting the rest leave the country or even put them in prison.